She thought it was just another night on the flight line, another round of loading heavy belts of ammo into the beastly Apache gunship under the harsh desert moonlight. The heat still clung to the air, and the roar of distant rotors made the ground tremble like a heartbeat. To her, it was routine, until the pilot leaned down, caught sight of the ink on her wrist, and froze like he'd seen a ghost. What he recognized wasn't just a tattoo. It was a secret that wasn't supposed to exist, something that tied her life and his in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. And from that moment on, nothing on that base, nor in their lives, would ever be the same again. The desert night was alive with its own kind of silence, the kind that hums with distant engines and the clank of steel against steel. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand, her eyes stinging from a mix of exhaustion and the grit of sand carried by the wind. The Apache sat hulking in front of her, its shape like a predator crouched low, ready to strike. At the dark horizon, she had loaded it countless times before. Ammo belts fed into the hungry maw of the gun, rockets checked and secured, every piece of machinery cared for like a soldier's weapon. To her, it wasn't just a machine, it was a monster that demanded respect. And tonight, she was the one feeding it, unaware that her smallest detail, a simple mark on her skin, was about to tear her routine apart. The ground trembled again, not from war, but from something about to unravel in her life. The pilot climbed down from the cockpit, removing his helmet, his face dimly lit by the sodium lights that stretched long shadows across the tarmac. He was tall, the kind of figure that carried an aura even before a word was spoken, and he had eyes sharp enough to slice through the haze of fatigue that hung in the air. He reached for a checklist, but halfway through the motion, his gaze locked onto her wrist. Just a flicker. Her sleeve had slipped back as she adjusted the heavy ammunition belt, revealing a tattoo, dark and etched into her skin. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a classified insignia, one that only a select few would ever recognize. His eyes froze, his breath caught, and for a heartbeat, he forgot to even blink. In that moment, the war around them, the buzzing machines, the desert itself, all of it dissolved into silence. What he saw wasn't supposed to exist, and yet it was right there in front of him, carried casually by a young woman who was supposed to be just another armorer on the line. The chill that ran through him wasn't just shock, it was recognition. She noticed the way he looked at her, the sudden halt in his movements. She glanced down at her arm and realized the ink was visible. Her heart skipped, but she didn't flinch. "Problem, sir?" she asked lightly, though her voice carried the faintest tremor, the kind only someone really listening could hear. He didn't answer right away. He studied her with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something softer hidden beneath. Layers of military discipline. Finally, he whispered, low enough it was almost lost to the wind. "Where did you get that?" His voice wasn't accusatory. It was broken, shaken, like the question carried weight far heavier than he could bear. And she, holding the last round of ammo in her hands, suddenly felt as though she was carrying not just steel but the burden of a memory she had tried so hard to bury. The night air felt thicker now, charged with an energy neither of them could explain, pulling them closer to a truth that neither was prepared to face. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set the ammo can down slowly, deliberately, the metal echoing against the concrete. She straightened, dusted her gloves, and met his stare head-on. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said, her tone steady, but her eyes flickering with something he hadn't seen in her before. Pain mixed with defiance, like someone carrying a secret too dangerous to share yet too heavy to keep hidden forever. For the first time since he'd landed on that base, he felt like the ground under his boots wasn't stable. That tattoo wasn't just ink. It was history. It was blood. And it was going to change everything. The pilot's hand tightened around his helmet, knuckles whitening as though the world had just shifted beneath him. He had seen countless tattoos, wolves, skulls, patriotic symbols inked into the arms of soldiers who wore them like armor against fear. But this one was different. This one was forbidden, stamped from a world buried under top-secret files and whispered legends told in dark corners of war rooms. It wasn't the design itself that froze him. It was the memory of what it meant, the ghosts tied to it, and the realization that this woman, standing so calmly before him, carried something that was supposed to be erased from existence. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, because he suddenly knew this night was no longer about loading ammunition. It was about unearthing a past that should have stayed dead. She noticed the way his jaw clenched, the way he studied her not as an armorer anymore, but as a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. The heat of the desert wind pressed against her face, but inside she felt cold, as if the shadows themselves were reaching out to reclaim her. She pulled her sleeve back down, covering the mark, but it was too late. He had seen it, and once. Seen, it couldn't be unseen. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice low, careful, but carrying a weight that begged him not to press further. Yet that was the problem. He did understand, at least enough to know that nothing about her was what it seemed. And the more he tried to convince himself to let it go, the more his gut told him he couldn't. Not when he'd waited years for answers. Not when fate had just placed one in front of him. "Who are you really?" he asked, his tone sharper now, not out of anger, but desperation. He took a step closer, his shadow overlapping hers in the harsh glow of the floodlights. She didn't back away. If anything, she lifted her chin higher, her defiance etched into her eyes even as her chest tightened with the truth she'd hidden for so long. "Just another soldier doing her job," she replied. But the words rang hollow between them, brittle, and he knew it. He felt the lie crackling in the silence that followed, and it gnawed at him like fire under his skin. In war, lies could get men killed. And this one carried a danger he couldn't yet name. She tried to return to her task, picking up the next belt of ammunition, forcing her hands to move with steady precision. But the weight of his stare burned hotter than the desert night. Every clink of metal against metal seemed louder now. Every second stretched longer, as if time itself knew it was standing on the edge of a revelation. And though she forced herself into silence, her heart betrayed her, pounding loud in her chest, each beat reminding her of a past that had chased her across continents, a past she thought she had escaped by wearing a uniform and blending into the noise of war. But secrets don't disappear. They linger, waiting for nights like this. When the right pair of eyes tears the cover off them in an instant, he remembered the stories, the classified missions, the rumors of a program that officially didn't exist. Soldiers branded with marks. Not for pride, but for silence. Men and women trained beyond breaking, whose very names were redacted from records. Ghost soldiers. He'd only ever heard whispers, told in fragments by veterans who drank too much and spoke too freely. But to see the mark now, living, breathing, inked into the wrist of the woman standing before him, it was like having a legend step out of the shadows. He had questions that demanded answers, but more than that, he had a feeling gnawing at his gut. This wasn't just about her. Somehow, some way, it was about him too. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp and unyielding, and she knew the storm was already brewing. "You saw nothing," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. It wasn't a plea. It was an order. But orders only work when the other person is willing to obey. And this pilot, with his history, his suspicions, and the ache of ghosts that still haunted him, wasn't about to let this slip into the shadows. Not when it might be the key to everything he'd lost. Not when the tattoo wasn't just a symbol of a secret program. It was a reminder of someone he thought was gone forever. And as the rotors of another helicopter roared overhead, drowning the silence between them, both of them understood something, without speaking it aloud. This wasn't the end of a conversation. It was only the beginning. The desert swallowed the sound of the passing helicopter, leaving only the ringing in their ears and the weight of unspoken words between them. She turned away first, her boots crunching against the gravel as she set another belt of ammunition into place. But her hands were shaking now, betraying her calm facade. He saw it, and he knew. Soldiers who carried marks like hers weren't supposed to shake, not unless they were standing on the edge of something personal, something raw. And suddenly, he realized he wasn't just staring at a mystery. He was staring at a person holding back the flood of everything she'd tried to bury. That thought alone tethered him to her in a way he couldn't explain. That he set his helmet on the wing root of the Apache, stepping closer. "I've seen that tattoo before," he said, his voice firm but low. Her entire body stiffened, though she didn't look up. "I lost someone years ago, someone who wore the same mark." His words hung heavy in the air, echoing against the silence of the tarmac. Her eyes flickered up, sharp with surprise before she could mask it. And in that single glance, he knew she wasn't just another armorer. She was connected to his past. She was connected to his pain. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was mistaken. But the truth clawed at her throat, and once the truth begins to rise, there's no burying it again. She set the last ammo can down, her gloves sliding off her trembling fingers, and finally faced him fully. If you knew someone with this tattoo, she said quietly, then you already know what it means. You already know why I can't talk about it. Her eyes glistened in the harsh light, and though she fought to keep her voice steady, it cracked on the last word. And that crack shattered something inside him too, that he remembered the day, 7 years ago, in the middle of a mission gone wrong, when the enemy had swarmed, when a squad that wasn't supposed to exist had stepped in to cover the retreat. He remembered a woman with fire in her eyes, one who fought like she carried the strength of 10 men, who vanished in the chaos and never returned. He'd carried her ghost with him ever since, not knowing if she had lived or died, only knowing that her courage had saved his life. And now, staring at this woman, with the same tattoo carved into her skin, he felt the ground shift beneath him again. Was it possible? Could she be connected to the one who'd been his guardian angel that night? His chest tightened as the questions threatened to break free. But she beat him to it. You shouldn't ask me for answers, she said, stepping closer, her voice low and trembling but resolute. Because if I tell you the truth, it will destroy the picture you've been holding on to all these years. And I don't want to be the one to take that from you. Her words cut him deeper than any bullet ever had. He realized then that this wasn't just about classified programs or military secrets. This was about two souls who had brushed against each other in the smoke of war, bound by fate and scars they couldn't erase. I don't need the whole truth, he whispered, his voice rough. I just need to know, was it you? The question broke from him like a plea, his eyes burning into hers, begging for something he wasn't sure he could survive hearing. Her breath hitched, her body trembling as she stared back. And in the silence that followed, everything slowed. The distant engines, the desert wind, the beating of two hearts caught in the gravity of the moment. Finally, she nodded, barely perceptible, but enough. It was me, she said, her voice breaking. I was there. I pulled you out when no one else could. And I was never supposed to let you know. The air between them shattered. His knees felt weak, his chest tightening with the flood of years of unanswered questions crashing down at once. He had lived with her ghost, and now here she was, alive, standing before him, flesh and blood. He wanted to be angry for the silence, for the years of carrying grief for someone who hadn't died. But all he felt was overwhelming relief, like a weight had been lifted off his soul. Why didn't you say something? He asked, voice raw. She shook her head, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. Because ghosts don't get to live normal lives. We disappear. We vanish into the classified files. You weren't supposed to see me again. And yet here they were. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The Apache loomed behind them like a silent witness, its steel frame reflecting the floodlights, its guns loaded and ready, but irrelevant compared to the battlefield of emotion standing between them. She wiped her eyes, forcing herself back into the hardened soldier she had trained to be. This changes nothing, she whispered. Tomorrow I'll be gone again. You'll forget you ever saw me. But he shook his head, fierce now, his voice rising with the intensity of a vow. No, I can't forget. Not again. I carried your memory through hell. I don't care what rules say. You're not disappearing from me this time. Her lips trembled, torn between wanting to believe him and knowing the system would never allow it. But his words lodged in her heart like a spark in dry kindling. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a ghost, not as a secret, but as a human being. A woman, someone worth remembering. And against all odds, she let that hope seep into her chest, if only for this night. The roar of engines broke the spell as another flight prepared to lift off, dust whipping around them in violent swirls. She stepped back, the reality of duty clawing at her again. They'll come for me, she said over the roar, her voice trembling. If they know you've seen me, they'll make sure I disappear for good. His eyes locked on hers, fierce and unwavering. Then let them come. Because I swear, If I have to fight the whole damn world to keep you from being erased again, I will. Her breath caught, tears welling again. But this time, they weren't born of fear. They were born of something she thought she had lost long ago, faith. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to give him the whole truth, but there wasn't time. So instead, she reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed his for just a fleeting second. That single touch carried years of silence, years of longing, years of pain. It was a promise, fragile but real. And as she pulled her hand away, she whispered the only words she could. Then remember me. Even if I vanish tomorrow, remember me tonight. The engine screamed louder, drowning her voice as she turned, her figure swallowed by dust and shadows. He reached for her, but she was gone into the storm, leaving him standing. Beneath the floodlights, his heart torn open yet alive with a fire he hadn't felt in years. The Apache loomed behind him, its guns loaded and ready, but for once, war wasn't the battle he cared about. The real war was keeping her memory alive in a world that wanted her erased. And as the night stretched on, he stood there, clutching his helmet, his eyes burning against the wind. She was gone, but her ghost was no longer a ghost. She was real. She was alive, and somewhere out there, she was still fighting to exist. He whispered into the desert night, a vow only the stars could hear. I'll find you again, no matter what it takes. And in the silence that followed, as the rotors faded into the horizon, the desert seemed to answer back with a whisper of its own. She wasn't gone. Not really. She was etched into him now, not just as a memory, but as a promise that could never be erased.